Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do a book review of Night Watch, written by Terry Pratchett. This is a fantasy novel. It is the 29th in the Discworld series, of which there are 41 overall, and it was first published in 2002. So first of all, what is the Discworld, the world that this is set overall? So it is, and it sounds a bit strange, but it actually makes a lot more sense when you get into the book, a flat disc-shaped world which rests logically or illogically on the backs of four very large elephants, which by themselves stand on the back of a very large world turtle which swims through space as though it was water. Totally normal and everyday by Discworld standards, and this sounds strange. Trust me, when you get into this world, that's actually normal and mundane compared to some of the rather strange things that go on, because Terry Pratchett's imagination is remarkable, frankly. And in this book, it's a little bit different because, in certain respects, he does something that he doesn't do anywhere else. He starts off set in the city of Ankh-Morpork, which is basically the Discworld equivalent of London, but every stereotype, every trope, every just idea anybody's ever had of London, England, is basically just turned up and amplified to sort of slightly silly levels, but not too ridiculous levels. It's like strange but familiar, and it still works. And indeed, the city of Ankh is a really interesting one. For the record, the city of Ankh-Morpork is actually essentially two areas. It's Ankh on one side of this major river, which is basically the Thames, called the Ankh, and the other half of the river, the city, is Morpork, so hence why it's called Morpork as itself. It's basically a twin city that's sort of joined into one. Now, the police force essentially in Morpork is called the City Watch. They are led by Commander Samuel Vimes, and there are many other members of the Guards, if you know the Guards books that exist, that are very familiar and have their brilliant personalities and ideas, each and every one. This starts off with a rather dark plotline. There is a serial killer on the loose in the city, but this is not a normal serial killer. This is a serial killer that is actively targeting and murdering City Watch. So it's a serial killer targeting the police. Yeah, Samuel Vimes does not like this at all. He's getting very upset indeed, as you would expect. And the city is becoming alarmed because, somebody that's targeted and managing to successfully kill policemen, essentially. Yeah, this isn't good at all. This is, people are on edge, and they are creating massive tensions and creating problems, basically, because the police force are what people rely on. They may not, a lot of people don't have very positive images of, City Watch and Vimes, but actually they do realise that they do provide a very, very good service, and they do keep things, under control and, fairly calm for the most part. So something that is disturbing, that is worrying really, really badly. So very quickly though, they get on the trail of this serial killer, and indeed Vimes has a meeting with this individual, and let's just say something occurs, an accident of some kind, let's call it, and Vimes and the serial killer ends up being essentially in a version of Morpork that is not quite their own. Exactly. It is their own, just in the past. So, now, Vimes, as well as trying to catch the serial killer, who is still somewhere about, he's now in his own history, his own timeline. And he knows that basically if he doesn't do things right, and if he messes everything up, obviously with the serial killer there that changes things, that there won't be a future for him. The future that he has built for himself and won't be there. The city will be a lot different and more chaotic, possibly. He's not sure, but he doesn't want to find out. He likes his life as it was and likes the city. So now he's got to figure out how to fix things in a version of Morpork that he thinks he knows because after all he's his own city, but in the past it's his city, just younger. But actually it's not quite as easy as that, and as he finds out. And yeah, things start spiralling, and I'm not going to say too much more. For the record, a little bit about him going in the own path. The mould is the spoilers for the record, but frankly, the back of the book, frankly, tells you that there's some form of time travel or alternate reality involved, and indeed, it's not made much of a secret on the book. So I don't feel bad, and indeed, that's why I'm happily talking about that one aspect, but I won't say any more. Now, the book works because of the characters. Samuel Vimes, the younger version, because remember, this is in his own history. So, again, he is in his own history, so he has to interact with himself, which is interesting. Samuel Vimes, both of them, but specifically the older one, he is an interesting character. He has to be different though, because obviously, he can't go around saying that he's from a future timeline or an alternative timeline, because that would be just problematic, let's say. So he has to be somebody else, and this presents problems for him, and he has to change his personality to a degree. He can't be his usual personality that he's developed, obviously, as everybody does in time, and he can't act the same way because he knows that won't work in this particular version of his city. So he's got to evolve and change very quickly in a very particular way to fit in with the city, and also to get the city to fit in with him, because he may change to a certain degree, but he's quite happy to sort of bully and sort of force his personality to a certain degree onto the city itself, because he is a commander of the City Watch, so he's used to sort of having to sort of push his personality and his way of thinking onto people to get people to actually understand and frankly obey the law. So it's a difficult position for him, and it's a very interesting circumstance to read about, because you're reading about Samuel Vimes, a character that you've known from the very first book, Guard's Guard, in a different way, because he's changing, he has to change. And with the other characters, you see some of the older guards, and indeed you see newer guards. Some of the old guards appear newer though, because they are younger, or older, or different. It's complex in a sense, but actually once you get into the book, you realise it's not actually that difficult, and it's just one that I thought was really interesting and a brilliant nuance to the book. This idea of character that you think you know, and you kind of do, but not quite. That's very much like the Discord as a whole. It's taking everyday things and just twisting them just a little bit so they're off centre. That's what Pratchett is doing with his own characters that you've already, by this point, got to know and very likely love, because they are really good characters. So it's an interesting situation, one that I think works well. The other reason this book works well and the characters work well is because of the location. Ankh-Morpork is a brilliant city and a brilliant environment, having basically a version of London that is not quite as you think it should be, and this is especially so in this book, because this is essentially alternative Ankh-Morpork, alternative London, so it's a little bit different things, the way society works, and like the guilds, for instance, and that sort of thing. They are not quite the same as they were, because there's been a lot of changes since Vimes originally started, and where he is now. Many years have passed, several decades, at least 30 years have passed, and things have altered drastically. So now the city that he's used to is not the city that he's in. So he's got to adapt to a city that is close to what he remembers and what he's used to, but not quite. And indeed, it's what you're used to. You know Ankh from many other Discord books, because a lot of Discord books are set in Ankh-Morpork, but it's not quite the same. It's a little bit different, with a slightly harsher edge to it in places, and a little bit more of a dangerous edge. It's an interesting environment, and one that I loved reading about. and one that I really did think worked extremely well here. As far as ideas and themes in the book go, one of them is very simply and very obviously, treat people the way you wish to be treated yourself, because one day they may be you, or one day they may have been you in the past, as the case may be in a rather obvious way in this book. Because you may think that, oh yes, it doesn't matter how you treat a particular person, but they may have been somebody very much like you, and would you appreciate somebody treating you like dirt or like that? So basically, treat people with respect and treat people with a level of dignity, and hopefully society will be a better place and people will learn respect and dignity themselves by being treated like it, and that will pass on, and the world will be a better place, you could say. I mean, simplistic, yes, and a bit naive to say it in that way, but that's sort of what the implication is. To improve the world, we need to just be better to each other, and that will improve and allow us to improve things around us, which to a large degree is true, simplistically, but it is true, which I think is a powerful message. The other major idea or theme is to basically take responsibility of your decisions. Don't shy away from having to make a decision, regardless of whether it's a really hard decision or a really apparently easy one, which may have long-reaching consequences. Regardless, you need to decide something and forge ahead, and that's what obviously Samuel Vimes has to do in this. There are things that he would prefer not to have to decide, but he has to, because otherwise he won't get back to where he's used to. He'll be stuck where he is if he even survives. He's got to make decisions that are not ones he wants to make. Nobody wants to make them sort of decisions, and that he's saying in his own way that make decisions, because if you don't, somebody will make them for you, and if somebody makes them for you, they'll be thinking of all their concerns, and things will not go the way you would ever wish them to be. They will go very likely very negatively for you, and things won't go well, let's say. So make your own decisions and try to be your own person. It's about independence as well, to a degree. Don't just rely on your reputation, on who you think you are. Be true to who you know you are. Vimes knows who he is, but he's got to change and evolve to meet the times, and that's what he's saying. He's saying, don't necessarily think, oh yes, I am this kind of person, so therefore I must always be this kind of person. You can change and adapt. Actually, people can change and adapt very quickly. A snap of a finger. So I wish I could snap fingers, by the way, but I can't. And yeah, just make sure you adapt yourself to the world. Don't just think of yourself too rigidly, which is an interesting question, and it's talked about in a very interesting way, which I greatly like about the book. And with that said, that is really it overall. So in summary, this is a very well written book with a very interesting and, for a Discworld book, a somewhat complicated plotline, at least at first, but actually, like many Discworld books, it does become simpler once you realise how Pratchett is thinking when he's writing it. It's got brilliant characters and a brilliant environment, and the ideas and themes that he's talking about in this are otherwise, especially with the Guards book. Pratchett with Guards books, he's always talking about issues that affect society as a whole, and issues that might or may not improve society and make kind of a nicer world for us to live in, as I mentioned. And with that said, that is it for this review and this video. So if you've read Nightwatch or you would like to, then please leave a comment and we can talk about it, or you'd like to know more about it, then leave a comment and I'll see what I can say without giving away horrible spoilers. There will be a link to this book in the description box below, along with all my social media. And with that said, that is it for this review. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.